Hello. Hello.
All right. On this lovely day, we are going to be using fundamental identities, yeah? And we are going to have one, for example, right here. And we are going to find all the other ones, yeah? So first we need to remember all the other identities. So cosecant is 1 over sine of theta. So that means sine is 1 over cosecant of theta. It's almost, these two here are shifted. So cosine is going to be 1 over secant of theta. And secant is going to be 1 over cosine of theta. And lastly, little tangent is going to be 1 over the cotangent of theta. And tangent, or cotangent is 1 over the tangent of theta. So if the tangent of theta is a quotient here, all we have to do is take the reciprocal. So cosine is now in the numerator for cotangent, and sine is in the denominator. So let's look at this first one. For Pythagorean identities, effectively this is a squared plus b squared equals c squared on the unit circle. When we are finding the other two related to this, we just get this one by itself by subtracting the cosine. So I can effectively do that in my head. So sine squared of theta is equal to 1 minus cosine squared of theta.
Oh, so we're just like getting...
Yep. Now if we get cosine squared by itself, then cosine squared of theta is actually the same, except I switched the two. There we go. And for these other ones, when we isolate the 1, we get 1 equals secant squared of theta minus the tangent of squared of theta. And when we isolate the tangent squared of theta, we get secant squared of theta minus 1. Commutative property says we can switch these two and have negative tangent in front, but generally it's just a little bit more elegant to have the subtraction there. And over here, same thing. And there's my last set. So now we're going to use these puppies to find all 6 trig functions. So we're going to find the values of all 6 trig functions. So the first thing we have to consider, number 1, is that my cosine is negative and my tangent is positive. All right, so because of that, because of the cosine here being negative and the tangent being positive, it only works in quadrant number 3. So that means my decisions about what my answers are going to be, remember that down here, my sine is negative, my cosine is negative, and my tangent is positive, which means the reciprocals, my cosecant is going to be negative, my secant is going to be negative, and my cotangent is going to be positive. So that will help us in just a moment. Let's start with cosine of u. We already know that one, so I'm just going to write that one down. Cosine of u is equal to negative 2/3. So that's 1/6 done. Woot woot. Now, what's the inverse? Which function is inverse? Secant of u is simply the reciprocal. Boom, 2 down. So we're 1/3 of the way. Okay, now using either one of these puppies, we can, up here, find something else. So notice, for example, I need to find sine. So I'll just use this guy here. I'll square the cosine evaluation, the negative 2/3, subtract it from 1, and then of course I have to get rid of that square too. So I am going to use the sine squared of u is equal to 1 minus the cosine squared of u. So I can just substitute in here. And I can put the negative 2/3, not negative 2/3, but negative 2/3 what? Squared. Because I have to, according to this, I'm squaring the result. Now continuing to evaluate, notice I do not distribute this negative because I have to square first. So my sine squared of u is equal to 1 minus, and this becomes 4/9. That simplifies to 5/9. And how do you get rid of the square? Square root. Now, when we take the radical of a fraction, we just radicalize the numerator and the denominator. So sine of u is equal to the square root of 5/3. Now, because we're in quadrant 3, which is, what's my sign here? Is it positive or negative?
Where'd the 3 go? Because for
Boom, so now we are 50% of the way, because we have 3/6. Now, we can do reciprocal, right? So what's the name of the reciprocal? Cosecant. So I say cosecant of u is equal to, and I keep the negative. Now 3 is upstairs, radical 5 is downstairs, but I have to rationalize the denominator by multiplying by radical 5. So 3 radical 5 all over 5. If you need to see that real quick, I rationalize the denominator by multiplying top and bottom by radical 5. So my cosecant of u, is going to be negative 3 radical 5 over 5. Now, in order to find tangent and cotangent, I am just going to substitute my sine value and my cosine value into this fraction, this ratio. So I'm going to get a complex situation. So sine goes upstairs. So tangent of u is equal to my sine, which is negative radical 5/3, all over my cosine, which is my original 2 negative 2/3. Now, if we need to see that written as a multiplication problem, then I need to put the denominator as a reciprocal. So now it's multiply by negative 3/2. Clearly, we see there's a cancellation, and the double negative becomes positive. Try that again. And now my result is radical 5/2. And remember that tangent is positive, and it turns out, because of my sine cancellation, it is positive. So what's cotangent?
2 rad 5 over 5.
Good, 2 radical 5/5, which would be the reciprocal, and then rationalize the denominator. Now, wouldn't that special? Because I have cotangent negative and sine positive, what quadrant am I in? So this puppy means all my decisions are going to be about quadrant 2. So just to refresh myself, cosine is negative, sine is positive, tangent is negative. All right. So easily we know what cotangent is, so I'll go ahead and record that. Is negative 5. So there's 1/6 of the way done. So therefore, by extension, my tangent is negative 1/5. Boop, 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 boop. We also know sine, so that's wicked awesome. So sine is going to be radical 26/26. So therefore, my cosecant is going to be what?
26 radical 26
Isn't
over
it
26.
just radical 26?
Just radical 26. Good. Now let's, cosecant and secant are both positive. So it's going to be the cosine and secant that are negative. So now I need to use one of my identities. So we see that we're looking for cosine. So let's use this bottom one here. So cosine squared. Cosine squared of x is going to be 1 minus the sine squared of x. So I'm just going to take my sine squared here, sine, and square that guy 4 over there. So equals 1 minus radical 26/26 squared, and that's my cosine squared of x. So when we simplify this, we get 1/26. To show that real quick, Radical 26 squared is 26, and 26 squared is exactly 26 squared. So they drop out like that, and you're just left with a 1. Now, this all simplifies to 25 over 26. That's the cosine squared. So what do I have to do? Radicalize the numerator and denominator, and I do have to rationalize the denominator as well. So that's 5 upstairs, radical 26 downstairs. So now I get 5 radical 26 all over 26, and is my sign positive or negative?
Negative.
It's negative because I'm in quadrant number 2. So now I'm going to reciprocal, which one? I'm going to reciprocal this one right here, because then I don't have to rationalize anything. So let me write that down real quick, though, as cosine. Cosine of x is negative 5 radical 26 over 26. And then secant of x is the reciprocal of this right here. Radical 26 over 5, and I do have to keep the negative because both of those guys are negative. And we found all 6 trigonometric functions for both of these.